Daphne had always been perceptive, someone who noticed the small details others ignored. When she stumbled upon a series of dispatches on Ivy's tablet, dispatches intimating at a cover-up involving plutocrat transfers, hidden phone calls, and a mysterious incident near the Malibu escarpment, she realized commodity terrible had happened. At first she tried to give Ivy the benefit of the mistrustfulness, believing there must be some misreading, but the more she delved, the further disturbing the picture came. Daphne ultimately brazened Ivy in private at Forrester Creations, demanding an explanation. Ivy originally tried to brush it off, claiming Daphne had misinterpreted the substantiation, but Daphne wasn't induced. She advised Ivy that if she didn't confess the verity, she'd go directly to the police. That trouble set in stir the chain of events that would lead to tragedy. Latterly that night Daphne transferred Ivy a communication asking to meet at the Sand House. She wrote that she had formally spoken with a counsel and was prepared to expose everything unless Ivy came clean. Ivy's hands quivered as she read the communication. Fear swamped her mind. She knew what Daphne was able of. Formally Daphne made a decision. She followed through no matter the consequences. Ivy realized that if Daphne revealed the verity, the Forrester family would turn their tails on her ever. She'd lose the career she had rebuilt and the fragile connections she had fought to repair. Hopeless and alarmed, Ivy drove to the Sand House hoping she could move Daphne to stay quiet. When Ivy arrived, the atmosphere was tense. The wind howled along the dark ocean front, swells crashing violently against the jewels below the precipice. Inside the house, Daphne stood by the window holding a brochure filled with documents. She looked calm but determined. The moment Ivy stepped outside, Daphne brazened her directly. She demanded to know why Ivy had prevaricated to everyone and how far she was willing to go to cover herself. Ivy tried to reason with her, averring that revealing the verity would only beget pain for everyone involved. She contended with Daphne to review, promising she'd fix everything ever. But Daphne refused. She told Ivy that people merited to know what she had done. The argument escalated snappily. Voices rose, allegations flew, and feelings entwined out of control. Ivy felt the walls closing in around her. Every word Daphne spoke sounded like a death judgment for Ivy's life in Los Angeles. Daphne eventually turned toward the door and declared that she was leaving to meet the authorities. In that moment commodity snapped inside Ivy. She rushed forward, grabbing Daphne's arm and soliciting her not to go. Daphne tried to pull down, but Ivy held on, hopeless to stop her. The struggle moved toward the open deck overlooking the dark ocean. Neither woman noticed how dangerously near they were to the edge. What happened coming lasted only seconds but would hang Ivy ever. Daphne shoved Ivy away in frustration, and Ivy artificially pushed back. Daphne lost her balance, stumbling against the rail. For a brief moment she tried to undergird herself, her eyes wide with shock. Ivy reached out, maybe to snare her, maybe to stop what was passing, but it was too late. Daphne fell backward over the rail and faded into the darkness below. The sound of the swells swallowed the terrible verity. Ivy stood frozen, unfit to breathe, gaping at the empty space where Daphne had been moments before. Her mind contended as she realized what had just happened. She didn't climb down to check on Daphne. She didn't call for help. Rather, fear took control. Ivy induced herself that it had been an accident, that there was nothing she could do now. However, they would no way believe her side of the story if the police came involved. Everyone formally knew about her worried history. Fear drove her to make a terrible decision. She would cover it up. Ivy wiped down the deck rail and gathered the documents Daphne had brought with her. She deleted dispatches from her phone and Daphne's tablet, trying to abolish any substantiation that the battle had ever happened. By the time she left the Sand House, Ivy had induced herself that the tragedy could remain retired ever. But secrets in Los Angeles infrequently stay buried. The following morning, news spread snappily through the megacity. A body had been discovered near the escarpments below the Sand House. The victim was linked as Daphne. Shock gurgled through the Forrester circle. Musketeers and family plotted to understand how such a terrible accident could have happened. Some believed Daphne must have slipped while standing near the edge. Others wondered if commodity more minatory had taken place. The case soon drew the attention of Detective Baker, a seasoned investigator known for his grim pursuit of the verity. Baker had handled numerous complicated cases in Los Angeles, and commodity about Daphne's death incontinently raised red flags. The scene didn't look like a simple accident. There were signs of a struggle on the deck, scuffed floorboards, a broken piece of the rail, and faint fingerprints that suggested further than one person had been present. Detective Baker began his disquisition by canvassing everyone who had been in contact with Daphne in the days leading up to her death. He snappily learned that Daphne had lately been arguing with Ivy about commodity important. Several substantiations recalled seeing pressure between the two women. When Baker questioned Ivy, she maintained her countenance, claiming she hadn't spoken with Daphne in days. She expressed shock at the news and claimed she had no idea what might have happened. But Baker wasn't induced. As the disquisition continued, small pieces of substantiation began to surface. A security camera near the road captured Ivy's auto driving toward the sand house late that night. Phone records revealed that Daphne had transferred Ivy a communication shortly before her death. The further Baker looked into the situation, the further suspicious Ivy's story came. Meanwhile, Ivy plotted to maintain her calm surface. Every knock on the door made her heart race. Every discussion about Daphne's death filled her with dread. She began to realize that hiding the verity was far more delicate than she had imagined. The guilt counted heavily on her heart, especially when she saw the pain Daphne's musketeers and family were passing. Detective Baker ultimately returned with a new round of questions. This time he presented Ivy with the substantiation he'd uncovered. He asked her directly why she had prevaricated about being at the sand house that night. Ivy tried to redirect the question, but Baker's piercing aspect made it clear he wasn't going to let the matter drop. The pressure between them grew with every fleeting moment. Baker explained that he believed Daphne's death wasn't an accident. Someone had been with her on the deck, someone who had reason to silence her. Ivy felt the walls closing in again, just like they had that night on the precipice. She realized the verity was sluggishly coming to light. Yet despite the mounting pressure, Ivy remained silent. The disquisition would continue, and with every new discovery Detective Baker moved closer to uncovering the verity behind Daphne's woeful fall. Whether Ivy's secret would eventually be exposed, or whether she'd find another way to escape the consequences, remained the biggest riddle gripping the world of the bold and the beautiful. The residers of Los Angeles had seen numerous dishonest and shocking exposures before, but this time the stakes were advanced than ever, and the verity hovered to destroy further than just one life. The shocking death of Daphne continued to shoot swells of fear and dubitation through the world of the bold and the beautiful, and in the days following the tragedy, pressure in Los Angeles grew thicker with every fleeting hour. The glamorous halls of Forrester Creations, generally filled with creativity, fashion sketches, and horse laugh, now felt surprisingly cold and quiet. Workers rumored among themselves about what had happened, and rumors spread snappily. Everyone knew that Daphne hadn't been someone who simply faded without reason. She had been open, determined, and lately veritably focused on exposing commodity she claimed was a terrible verity. The biggest question haunting everyone was simple yet frightening: what verity had she been about to reveal before she failed? Meanwhile, Ivy Forrester was fighting a battle within herself. Outwardly she appeared calm and sympathetic, offering condolences to everyone who mourned Daphne, but inside her studies were twisting. She slightly slept at night. Every time she closed her eyes she saw the same horrifying moment replaying in her mind: the flash of shock in Daphne's eyes, the sound of her body hitting the rail, and the silence that followed when she dissolved into the darkness below the precipice. Ivy tried to move herself that it had been an accident. She told herself constantly that she hadn't meant to hurt Daphne, but the verity dallied in her heart like a shadow she could no way escape. At the same time, Detective Baker was still erecting a case. Baker had always been known for his tolerance and sharp instincts. Over the times he'd seen numerous suspects try to outwit him, but infrequently did they succeed. What troubled him about Daphne's death was the pattern of small inconsistencies that kept appearing whenever he examined the substantiation. Nothing on its own proved murder, but together the pieces painted a suspicious picture. The damaged rail on the deck suggested there had been force involved in the fall. The clang marks on the rustic bottom indicated that two people had been floundering. And maybe most important of all, the digital records showed that Daphne had communicated Ivy shortly before her death. Baker decided to dig deeper into the relationship between the two women. He canvassed several people connected to the Forrester family, asking about any recent conflicts between Daphne and Ivy. Sluggishly, a disquieting narrative began to crop. Some substantiations recalled eavesdropping heated exchanges between them in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Others mentioned that Daphne had lately suggested she had discovered a secret about Ivy that could change everything. Baker took careful notes as each statement added another subcast to the riddle. One autumn, Baker visited Forrester Creations again, requesting another discussion with Ivy. When she entered the conference room and saw him staying, her heart incontinently began pounding. She forced a polite smile, but Baker noticed the pressure in her posture. He began the discussion calmly, explaining that new information had come to light and he demanded explanation. Ivy jounced nervously, averring she was willing to help still she could. Baker also presented her with the security footage showing her auto near the sandhouse that night. For a moment Ivy's expression set. She had hoped that no cameras had captured her appearance, but easily that stopgap had been lost. She tried to recover snappily, claiming she had driven past the area but no way stopped. Baker watched her nearly, noting how her voice wavered ever so slightly. He asked why she had failed to mention that earlier. Ivy said she hadn't allowed. It was important. The operative leaned back in his president and studied her face precisely. He explained that he believed Daphne had arranged to meet someone that night, someone she trusted enough to defy alone. The substantiation suggested that person was Ivy. Ivy felt the room spinning as the pressure increased. She claimed that she had nothing to do with Daphne's death, repeating the claim again and again as if saying it enough times would make it true. But Baker wasn't induced. Outside the disquisition room, the emotional impact of the tragedy was spreading through the entire community. Musketeers of Daphne gathered together to mourn her loss, flashing back her passion and her determination to stand up for what she believed in. Numerous of them were confused by the sanctioned proposition that she had simply slipped and fallen. The further they talked about it, the lower sense it made. Daphne had been careful by nature, someone who infrequently took gratuitous pitfalls. The idea that she'd accidentally tumble over a deck rail sounded delicate to believe. As the dubieties grew, so did the pressure girding Ivy. Among those beginning to question her jest was Electra Forrester, who had lately been caught in several dramatic conflicts involving Ivy. Electra flashed back how hopeless Ivy had sounded during their last discussion with Daphne. At the time it had only sounded like another family argument, but now it felt like commodity important darker. Electra ultimately approached Baker with her enterprises. She told him that Daphne had formally commended she was gathering substantiation against Ivy. According to Daphne, Ivy had done commodity terrible in the history and had been desperately trying to hide it. Electra admitted she didn't know the details, but she believed Daphne was serious about exposing the verity. This information strengthened Baker's reservations significantly. He began assaying Ivy's fiscal records, phone logs, and particular dispatches more nearly. It wasn't long before he uncovered commodity disquieting several deleted dispatches between Ivy and Daphne that had been incompletely recovered through forensic technology. The dispatches suggested that Daphne had hovered to reveal commodity about Ivy unless she came clean. When Baker read the repaired textbooks, one line stood out above all the others. "Meet me tonight or I'm going to the police." That communication had been transferred only hours before Daphne failed. With this new substantiation, Baker returned to question Ivy again. This time his tone was firmer. He explained that the disquisition had uncovered evidence that she and Daphne had arranged to meet the night of the incident. Ivy's face turned pale as she realized how important the operative formerly knew. The pressure came unsupportable. For a moment Ivy considered confessing everything, admitting that the battle had entwined out of control and that Daphne's death had been a woeful accident. But fear stopped her. She imagined the consequences: captivity, disgrace, the Forrester family turning their tails on her ever. Rather, she continued to deny everything. But Baker could see the cracks forming in her story. As the disquisition boosted, the verity about what happened on that dark deck sounded nearer than ever to being revealed. Ivy's precisely constructed cover-up was beginning to unravel piece by piece, and the shadow of guilt that followed her was growing insolvable to hide. In the dramatic macrocosm of the bold and the beautiful, secrets infrequently stay buried ever. And with Detective Baker ending in, It sounded only a matter of time before the shocking verity about Daphne's death, and Ivy's part in it, would eventually come to light, hanging to destroy lives, connections, and the fragile balance within the important Forrester family. As the disquisition boosted in the dramatic world of the bold and the beautiful, the pressure girding the mysterious death of Daphne continued to spread through Los Angeles like a storm that no bone could escape. What had originally appeared to be a woeful accident was now beginning to look further and more like a precisely hidden crime. Rumors circulated far and wide, from the services of Forrester Creations to the elegant homes along the Malibu bank. Everyone sounded to be asking the same unsettling question: what really happened on that deck the night Daphne failed? At the center of the growing dubitation stood Ivy Forrester, who was getting decreasingly trapped in a web of falsehoods she had created in her despair to survive. Ivy had always been seen as someone complicated but eventually repairable. She had made miscalculations in the history, but she had fought hard to rebuild her place within the important Forrester family. Now, still, the pressure of the secret she carried was beginning to erode the calm image she tried so hard to project. Each day felt heavier than the last. When Ivy walked through the halls of Forrester Creations, she could smell people watching her more nearly. Exchanges stopped when she entered a room. Some associates offered sympathetic grins about Daphne's death, but others sounded uncertain, as if they were beginning to suspect commodity darker beneath the face. Ivy tried to move herself that the disquisition would ultimately lose instigation. After all, there were no substantiations to the struggle on the deck. No bone had seen Daphne fall. Ivy believed that as long as she stayed calm and repeated the same story, the police would ultimately be forced to accept the incident as a woeful accident. But she undervalued the determination of Detective Baker. Baker had been studying the case relentlessly, making together every small detail that others might overlook. He'd a character for seeing patterns where others saw coexistence. The more he examined the timeline of events, the clearer it came that Ivy's interpretation of the story simply didn't align with the substantiation. One evening Baker returned to the sand house to review the scene again. Standing on the deck where Daphne had fallen, he precisely observed the structure of the rail and the position of the girding cabinetwork. The ocean swells crashed violently against the jewels below, echoing the same haunting sound that Ivy had heard the night everything went wrong.